So just about every fantasy book ever written has had some form of magic in it. The magic might play a big role in the story, it might play a small role in the story, but it's always there in some way, shape, or form. And every fantasy world has its own unique magic system. And because YouTube loves top 10 videos, I figured, you know what, today I'm going to do a top 10 video on the best magic systems that I've ever read in fantasy. Now, a couple things to keep in mind here. One, these are all just my opinions. If you disagree, that's fine. And beyond that, when I look at what systems are better than others, I'm going to look at things like just rule of cool or sense of wonder that the magic makes me feel, and I'm also going to be looking at how well explained is the magic, how well do we understand it, and what kind of emotions do we feel when the magic comes up. Because with something like, Lord of the Rings, we don't understand Gandalf's magic very well, but we always feel a sort of sense of wonder when he uses it, and we always know, oh shit, something's about to happen. Also, there will be massive, massive spoilers for every book that I mention on here, so if that bothers you, you probably shouldn't watch. Or maybe put it on mute and watch because, that helps my watch time, but, just be aware.
This is the introduction song. It's not very good, but it's not too long.
Number 10, A Song of Ice and Fire, aka Game of Thrones. So this one is a little weird because A Song of Ice and Fire is a very, very low magic setting. And that actually works in its favor, though. Because while the magic is not very well explained, it's also very uncontrollable, and so every time it shows up, it adds a lot of tension to the story. Like the Red Priests of R'hllor, they can bring dead people back to life. We don't know exactly how this works, but we do know that every time they do it, that person loses something of themselves. They lose part of their soul, basically. And so every time it happens, it's not ideal. It's not a good situation to be in. And beyond that, we also have things like the White Walkers, who are just a very terrifying threat because we don't understand them. We don't understand how they work exactly. And then, there's prophecies and visions and stuff, but the validity of these is always called into question. So, while the magic system in this is not very well explained, and there's not a whole lot of depth to it, every time it shows up, it makes you feel what it's trying to make you feel, and for that reason, I have to put this one on the list. Number 9, Dune. Now, this one I'll admit, this one's cheating a bit, because Dune isn't really fantasy, it's more science fantasy, a combination of science fiction and fantasy. But the stuff in here is just so fucking weird and out there, and beyond anything that science can really create, that I have to consider it magic. So, the main thing that they have in this world that works as basically magic are called awareness-enhancing narcotics. And the most common of these is called melange, aka spice, which is only found on one planet, which is called Arrakis, aka Dune, and I don't know, that's not important. The important part is that these narcotics, when you take them, they enhance your awareness. Like, they can make it so that you just know more about what's going on around you, but with certain people, they can make it so that you just straight up can see the future. You can see thousands of years into the future, and because of that, certain characters in Dune, they actually plan events thousands of years in the future, and it's just, what? It falls into the same category as A Song of Ice and Fire, where every time it pops up, you're like, oh shit, okay, so that's what's going on. But at the same time, it works better because we understand it better. I don't know, there's not a whole lot else to say. I just think it's really, really cool that people can eat the spice and see the future. Number 8, Harry Potter. Now this one is the first magic system on here that's a little bit harder. Like, it has more rules and it's explained better. Like, the reader, the audience understands how it works better. But it's not perfect in that regard. See, in this world, some people are born with the ability to use magic. They're wizards. However, for the most part, it's pretty weak and unfocused. So they need a wand, which just acts as a conduit for their magic and allows them to do more powerful and more complex spells. And number 2, they just have to train a lot, train and study a lot. That's the whole point of the series. I don't think I need to explain Harry Potter to too many of you, but you know, it would be weird if I didn't, so whatever. Anyways, point is, there's a whole bunch of different spells that are used by characters in this that do, you know, mundane tasks or just do more, you know, fantastical magic stuff like summoning creatures or shooting fire out of yourself. Like, there's a whole bunch of neat stuff in this, and really that, more than anything, is what brings this magic system onto the list. Like, it's the sense of wonder. The sense of, wow, that's so cool. Wow, I wish I was a wizard. I wish I was going to Hogwarts. I went to Harry Potter World last December, and that's basically how I felt the whole time. Okay, I was fucking 21 years old, and I was giddy like a child because Harry Potter just has that effect on people. The reason it's not higher is that there are a couple of small inconsistencies with this. Like, for example, I'm sure we all remember the very iconic scene from the first film, where they're learning Wingardium Leviosa, how to levitate an object with, and so they have to do swish and flick, and they have to say Wingardium Leviosa, and there's the it's Wingardium Leviosa, not Leviosa, and you know, we all remember that. But the thing about that is that, okay, so you need to pronounce the spell very specifically, and you need to do a specific movement with your wand. But then later on in the series, they have people just casting spells without speaking sometimes, or like just shooting out sparks and stuff without speaking. And so they never explain exactly why some spells you need to speak, some you don't. Like, do you just have to get really good at doing it and eventually you can do it just by thinking the words or something? It's never really well explained, at least not that I'm aware of. And so for that reason, it does get bumped down a couple notches. However, there's still a whole lot of depth to this because you have things like potions and magical creatures which use other types of magic that wizards can't. And so, because of that, it works decently as a hard magic system, don't get me wrong. And it works great to just give you a sense of wonder every time you're reading about it, but it's not perfect. That's it. Number 7 is a book that I actually only read pretty recently. It's The Emperor's Soul. And, hell, it's not even really a book, it's just a novella. But the thing is, The Emperor's Soul is written by Brandon Sanderson, and it actually takes place in the same planet as Elantris. However, it takes that same magic system that we saw in Elantris and pulls it in a whole different direction. Like, the way it works in both of those books is how you can make certain glyphs, like, you know, they're runes basically. You just draw something, and they'll do something. Like, you draw a fire rune, fire comes out. You draw a healing rune, people will heal, that sort of thing. But in The Emperor's Soul, it's way more complex, because what they do is they take these little sphere things and they make extremely, extremely intricate runes and designs on them, and they put them on an object or a person. And what that does is it actually alters that object or person's presence in the cognitive realm. Because, yeah, in that universe, everything exists in 3 realms. The physical, pretty self-explanatory, the cognitive, and the spiritual. And the cognitive is how objects and people view themselves, as well as how other objects and people view them. It's a little complicated, but you get the gist of it pretty quickly while reading. And anyways, by changing the way something views itself in the cognitive realm, you can actually rewrite its past and rewrite its memories to completely change the object. Like, if you have a table that's just a plain wooden table, and then you rewrite its past so that it was found by an artisan, and he just decided to carve a whole bunch of very intricate, very nice designs in it, then you could do that, and then, poof, you got a really nice table instead of a really crappy plain one. And there's a whole bunch of things you can do with this as well. Like, basically, as long as you have the knowledge and the imagination, you can do basically whatever you want using this. And it's a very, very deep system. Like, if they came out with a book, like a supplementary book, which is just all the runes and what they do and how they work, I would totally fucking buy that. Like, make no mistake, I want to know a lot more about this, and I just... Okay, I don't want to fanboy too much, but, like, it's a really, really cool system. The only reason that it's not higher on the list is that we don't spend a whole lot of time with it. Like, we see a bunch of different ways that it can be used in the short amount of time that we have, but it's just a novella, and it's only a little over 100 pages, so hopefully one day Sanderson comes out with like a full-length book that explores this magic system in more depth, and we got more people like turning themselves into warriors and stuff all of a sudden, but you know, for now, it's a little disappointing, but, you know, it's still great. Number 6 is from the Summoner Trilogy. Now, I reviewed these books last year. It's the Novice, the Inquisition, and the Battle Mage. And I was just constantly blown away by how much passion was put into it. Because this is another magic system where, like, it has the Rule of Cool and Sense of Wonder that really bumps it up higher than it would normally be. Because the way magic works in this is that there are certain people who have the ability to summon demons from another dimension. And, okay, that's fine. And there are certain rules for how you can and can't summon demons. Like, you need to have something usually made of leather because it has to be an organic material, and it has to have a pentagram on it, and then you have to, you know, focus on it and poof, summon your demon. And also, you have to be bonded to that demon before you can summon it. But once you have a demon, you also have mana inside your body, which you can use to cast spells. And this is kind of similar to Elantris, where you draw certain runes and certain things happen. You draw a lightning rune, boom, lightning. And this is not a particularly deep system, but again, it has Sense of Wonder, Rule of Cool, and there's also some interesting stuff you can do with it. Like the main character of the series, Fletcher, he eventually realizes that if he wants to summon his demon, he can't always be carrying that leather sheet around, so he just gets a pentagram tattooed on his hand, and then he realizes, bam, I can just send my demon out and do it that way. And he also gets runes tattooed on his fingers, so that he can just shoot fire out without taking the time to draw a rune in the air. And that's just really cool. And everything revolves around runes, too. Demons don't have their own special rules. Like, for example, demons that can breathe fire, they can do that because they have a fire rune in their throat. So they just pour some mana into it and poof, fire. And again, this isn't the deepest, most complex system, but there's still a lot you can do with it, and it's just fun. So yeah, it's high on the list. Number 5 is for a book that pretty much no one has ever heard of, at least I've never heard anyone talk about it, Burnmark. So Burnmark takes place in a world that's very similar to ours, except that witches exist. And they aren't like a secret society or, you know, most people don't know about them. People know about them, and in fact there's public inquisitions which search out and find witches, and they just sort of exist in this world. But what makes it interesting is that a lot of the rules for their magic are similar to how witches were viewed hundreds of years ago. Like, for example, you can make yourself look like somebody else, but in order to do so, you need to draw a picture, a very detailed picture of what you want to look like, and you need to have a bit of your hair with it, and you need to, you know, obviously pour some magic into it as you're doing it. And then you also have to keep that picture with you at all times, and other people will just see an illusion of what you look like. Things like that. And so, while there's nothing super flashy or amazing, like they can't shoot fire out of their hands or anything, it's a very interesting system because, one, I've just never seen anything quite like it before, and two, it has very, very clear limitations on it, and you can still do cool stuff with it, but it's very limited, and I'm going to quote Brandon Sanderson here by saying the flaws are more interesting than the magic itself. Like, you can't just think about somebody and have a psychic connection with them. You have to, like, actually steal some of their blood and make a voodoo doll, basically. Like, it's just really, really neat. But at the same time, you see how witches can be terrorists, they can be criminals, or they can be good people. Like, there's a million different uses for all this. And there's also, like, old-timey witch finding and witch hunting materials. Like, if they have iron manacles on, they can't cast any magic, and if there are bells nearby, then the bells will go off when they try and use magic. Like, again, I've just never seen anything quite like it before. And I'm always fascinated to see, like, okay, what exactly can they do, and what can't they do? So, even though these books did not do very well, I don't think, because they made 2 of them, a third one was definitely planned, but it's been like 6 years since the last one came out, and I've heard nothing about it. Anyways, point is, I definitely want to go into this world, and I definitely want to see more about how these witches work. And that more than anything, making me want to learn more, that more than anything, is why this magic system is so high on the list. Number 4, Mistborn. So this one, like, you could not have the list without having this on there somewhere. For the simple reason that this one does not have one magic system, it has 3. Alright, so the first one is this thing called hemallurgy. And what that is where you take metal spikes and you hammer them into one person, killing them, and then you take them out and you hammer them into another person, and it puts some of their power into them. And depending on where in the body you hammer it, as well as what type of metal you're using, it'll give that person different abilities. Like, for example, you hammer it in one spot, then they'll be able to push and pull on metal. Or if you put it in another spot, then they'll be able to sense when other people are using magic. It's very, very fascinating and very deep, even though we don't spend a whole lot of time with it. The second magic type is called feruchemy, and that one also revolves around metal. Only what that one is that you can put some of your own power into metal and then use it later. Like, for example, if you put it into if you use copper, you can put your own memories in there and then access them later, kind of like a pensieve in Harry Potter. Or if you use pewter, you can hold your own strength in there, so you'll be weak for a while you're feeding your strength into it, but then later you can come back twice as strong, so you can use it in an emergency. But the third magic system is by far the one we spend the most time with, and that's called allomancy. What that is again, it revolves around metals, but what you do is you swallow metals, and while they're in your stomach, you can burn them to have different effects. And, you know, depending on what type of metal you use, it does different things. Like, for example, if you use steel, then that can push on other metal objects. If you use iron, that pulls on other metal objects. If you burn pewter, then that makes your whole body stronger, as well as faster, and it helps you from feeling fatigue, that sort of thing. And if you use tin, it enhances all your senses. So you can see really far, you hear really well, all that good stuff. You have to be born as an allomancer, though. And there's two different types. There's mistings, who can only burn one type of metal, and there's mistborn, who can burn at all of them. Like, there's 16 different types. We only find 14 in the books, but there's 16 different types. There's no one out there that can only burn 2 to 15 metals. Like, it's either one or all. And the reason that allomancy works so well is that, again, it has very clear limitations. Like, if you run out of metal, well, you can't burn anymore. You're just a normal person at that point. But if you have a whole bunch of it, like if you somehow manage to gain a bunch, you can burn it all at once and do much more powerful attacks with it, and that sort of thing. So it's great system, and they use it in a lot of very creative ways, and there's some metals which have really neat properties. The only reason that this is like number 4 is that there are, again, some small inconsistencies here. For example, near the beginning of the first book, when Kelsier is training Vin, he tells her that when you're pushing with steel, then you can only push on something that weighs less than you, because if you push on something heavier than you, then it's just going to send you flying back in the other direction. And that makes sense. But then he also mentions that, like, Vin can push harder than him because she's a more powerful Mistborn or something, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then later, when Elend becomes a Mistborn through different means than she does, because he's like an original Mistborn who gets his powers directly from a god on their world, he can push way harder than she can. And in fact, all of his metals seem to give him more power than hers, and that's just, I don't know, I could never quite wrap my head around that, around how that makes sense. And it was just weird, it was kind of confusing, a little disappointing, and yeah, I just didn't like it that much. It was inconsistent, and so for that reason, Mistborn cannot be at the top of the list. Number 3 is a book that I read, but I wasn't the biggest fan of, and that is The Powder Mage, specifically the first book, The Promise of Blood. Now, just like Mistborn, this book has 3 different magic systems, but unlike Mistborn, it's a little bit more consistent, so that's why I put it at number 3 instead of 4. So, the 3 different types are, again, you have to be born with the ability, which is a little annoying to me. Like, I prefer magic that you can study to learn more about, rather than just having to be born with the ability. You have to be born awesome. Whereas, you know, like the Emperor's Soul, that one you can just learn. But anyways, point is, there's 3 different abilities, all of which you have to be born with. There's people who are just born with some sort of strange power. Like, for example, there's a guy that, in the book, that never forgets anything. He has perfect memory. There's another guy that never needs to sleep. You know, things like that. They're not too flashy, but they're useful. Then there's, I believe they're called the Gifted, and they're just like regular elemental wizards. So what they do is, you know, they can shoot out fire or lightning or ice and things like that, but it's a little bit more complicated than that, because there is, like, another basically another plane of existence where they can sense other things' auras. And in addition to that, each of their fingers is tied to a specific element. So like air, fire, earth, water, that sort of thing. And so by manipulating the energy that's in that other dimension, that's how they bring out fire and all that. So it's decently well explained. It's a little bit better than a lot of fantasy I've read, to be honest. But by far the best magic system in this are the powder mages. So their magic is all just based around gunpowder. And the thing about gunpowder is that in the other dimension that the gifted can manipulate things in, every object and person has a presence there except gunpowder. And powder mages, what they do, they have several different abilities. One is that they can telepathically just set off gunpowder. Like if there's a barrel of gunpowder nearby, they can just think about it really hard and make it explode. They can also, when gunpowder goes off, they can absorb the force from it and then send it out somewhere else. Like, for example, one of the first things that happens in this book is that a character tries to shoot a gun at a powder mage, and he absorbs all the power from it and sends it into the floor. So the floor like cracks open, and the bullet just falls to the ground uselessly. So that's really neat. And they can also ingest gunpowder, like, snort it up their nose or swallow it or something like that, and it actually makes them a lot stronger. It puts them into what's called a powder trance. And so, if they're in the middle of battle, they can just like, okay, and then, they get a lot faster, stronger, the reflexes are better. It's almost like an adrenaline rush. So by putting all of that together, you get this really interesting, unique magic system that would have been cool on its own, but when you combine it with the other two, which are also pretty well explained and pretty well explored, it's just a million times better. I'm sorry, Mistborn, but as far as I could read in this book, or as far as I could tell in this first book, there were no inconsistencies. Number 2 should come as no surprise to anyone who's a big fan of fantasy. It is the Wheel of Time series. Now, the thing about Wheel of Time is that it only has one magic system, but it's so broad and so in-depth and has so many different facets to it and can be used to do so much, and it's so consistent that, you can't have a list like this without putting it on there. So the way magic works in this is that there's this infinite pool of energy that's just called the One Power, and some people are born with the ability to tap into that power. They're called channelers, and using the power is called channeling. However, the thing that makes it more interesting is that the power is split into two halves. Saidar, which can only be used by women, and Saidin, which can only be used by men. And so because of this, when men or women channel, they do it differently. Like, when they do certain tasks, it works differently for men than it does for women. For example, later in the series, characters learn how to create these gateways, which are portals to other parts of the world, or even to other dimensions sometimes. And the way it works for men is they actually take space, they fold it, and they punch a hole through it. But the way it works for women is they actually alter both points in space so that they're exactly the same, and then you can just walk from one to the other. It's very, very interesting that way. And also, men and women can link together and to perform even more powerful feats. It's really, really fascinating. However, each person can only channel so much of the power at once. If they try and draw in too much, they can actually burn themselves out, which severs them from the power, or they can actually even kill themselves if they aren't careful. But you can also, sever someone from the power on purpose, or just, have them shielded so that they can't quite reach it. And it's really fascinating to see things like that, because there's not a whole lot of fantasy where the magic can really be cut off from somebody. But even beyond all of that, the way that the magic actually works, the way they cast spells, or weaves as they call them, is just endlessly fascinating. So it doesn't require any spoken spells or gestures or anything like that. It's all mental. But the way it works is that when they channel, they can make these threads pop into existence. And there's 5 different types of threads. There's fire, earth, water, air, and spirit. And by mixing them up certain ways, they can do different things. That's why they call them weaves, because they're threads, and they weave them together. If you just wanted to light a candle, then just poof, fire, a little bit of that. But if you wanted to make lightning, you would take fire and air and weave them together a certain way, and then lightning. And so they can do pretty much anything they can imagine by doing this, and it's really just fascinating. And then there is one really, really big inconsistency here, which I don't know if you've noticed, I don't like inconsistencies very much in these systems. But anyways, point is, people can actually be healed after they're severed from the one power. Like, they can rebuild their connection to the power and allow them to channel again. And no, that's dumb, okay? Because the thing is, that's a source of tension in a lot of the scenes, is that characters are drawn in too much of the power, and they're like, okay, I'm exhausted, I can't do any more, otherwise I could burn myself out or kill myself. But then, in the later part of the series, like, okay, if you burn yourself out, that sucks for now, but then you could just find another channeler and have them heal you. Like, what? Like, it takes away a lot of the tension and a lot of the drama from some of those battle scenes and from some of those scenes where they're, like, experimenting. And, like, honestly, the whole series would have been a lot better if they had just removed that one little thing. And number one, I'm gonna get flack for this. I know I'm gonna get shit for this just because, like, I don't have a big audience, but someone out there is gonna be upset by my number one choice. The best fantasy system, the best fantasy magic system I've ever read is in the Inheritance Cycle, aka Eragon. Now, before you get angry, let me explain. So, in this world, anyone can learn to use magic. They just have to study it and be talented enough in it. I like that. Anyone can learn to use mind reading and psychic powers. They, again, have to study it a lot. I like that. So it removes the genetic predisposition thing that annoys me a lot. And also, you can do literally anything that you can think of with magic in this. Because, see, the way it works is that there's this language, which is just called the Ancient Language, and it was invented by a race of people who have since gone extinct. They're not humans or elves or dwarves or anything like that, because apparently magic used to just be wild and free and uncontrollable. So what they did was they just bound it to their language. And so now when you want to cast spells, you just say something in the Ancient Language. Like, if you want to light something on fire, just say Brissinger, which is fire. If you want to make an object come to your hand, you just say object come to my hand, and it comes to you. And there are very clear limitations on this. Like, it takes energy to do this. Like, it takes about the same amount of energy to do something with magic that it would to do something with normal means. Like, again, if you want to pick up a rock, okay, that wouldn't take a lot of energy either way. But if you wanted to move a mountain, you would kill yourself trying. Because if you take out too much energy, it can make you pass out or kill you. However, again, remember I mentioned you can do mind reading, which is different from magic. You don't have to use spells for it. If you can do that, and you can break into someone's mind, you can actually take energy from them. Or they can just give you energy. So you can have a whole bunch of people all together trying to cast one spell. So you could do bigger ones. That's really cool. You can also take energy from, like, plants and animals. Also really cool, because, you know, they do have minds. They aren't quite as complex as ours, but they do have them. And you can also store energy in things like precious stones, like diamonds or sapphires. You can just store energy there and then draw on it later when you need it. So, while this is a limitation, there are ways, I don't want to say there are ways around it, but there are ways to stretch it, we'll say. In addition to that, the Ancient Language, because magic is so tied to the Ancient Language, the Ancient Language itself has magical properties. Like, when you're speaking in the Ancient Language, you cannot lie. You can't. And when you speak an oath, you have to keep that oath. So, just little things like that really make this stand out from other series. Like, again, just, you can use your imagination, and if you know the words for it in the Ancient Language and you have enough energy, you can do it in the Eragon universe. So, for that reason, it's just so cool. It gives such a sense of wonder. It's endlessly deep. Again, like Wheel of Time and Mistborn, those are very deep series. Those have very deep magic systems, but you can't do everything with them. You can do everything with the Eragon magic system. And so, for that reason, I have to say it is the best magic system in any fantasy series I've ever read. If that upsets you, I'm sorry. It's amazing. There's really no way around it.